Human resources employees, what's the most what the hell complaint you've had to deal with? Letter complaint. The doctor called me fat. Looked up patient weight, patient unambiguously fat. BMI 50 plus doctor was giving results of positive tests for non-alcohol related fatty liver disease and corresponding dietary advice. Wrote the patient a non-apology letter, gently hinting that choice of words was not ideal, but perhaps some of the doctor's advice was good. Story 2. Not HR, but in my office, there was a huge deal of who kept finishing the pot of coffee without starting a new one. Let me tell you, some office workers had to go 4 to 5 minutes without coffee, which caused chaos. Story 3. HR here. There's always the standard stuff. I got japed on PTO, overtime, hours. Employees stole a work truck, drove to gambling town, pawned work tools in truck, gambled all money away, got drunk, crashed work truck, fell asleep at wheel, found by cops in the morning. He complained that none of this was specifically forbidden in the handbook. We then offered him Cobra because it was cheaper than proving in a hearing that his actions fell under gross incompetence. One lady cashed her check twice by mobile deposit, then taking it to a check cashing place. Once the company asked if we could make the 401k waiting period 10 years. Had another guy take a loan against his 401k for custom motorcycle parts? Not a complaint, just wow. Had a guy complain that we took too much for child support. He had 6 orders, different lady each. MF was fertile. Pregnant EE, who sat right by the break room, complained about the lady microwaving salmon for lunch every ducking day. Spoiler. It was me who complained. Had a voicemail from a former employee complaining that he was fired for bullcrap reasons. I saved that for a long time. But the one that takes the cake, flirty married gid at work is winking at the ladies. But he's connected, so he gets a small talking to. Behavior stops. Good, right? Receptionist, no calls, no shows. Then we get a call from receptionist's husband. Turns out she was sleeping with flirty gid and doing med at work. Wouldn't have caused such a huge ruckus. But flirty gid is married to the owner's sister, plus med. She is in rehab, and flirty gid has to tell his wife that it happened in their own bed. Cheap git wouldn't even spring for a no-tell motel. Story 4. Not HR, but I used to help my HR team in organizing a summer event for families. Nothing special, just a grill party for employees with some extra events for children. This was a large company of around 300 employees. A week before the event, one guy rose ape crap hell because we chose the date when his daughter was on summer camp. Story 5. The most what the heck's complaint I've seen someone say happened at their work is that finger guns were banned. Someone complained they felt threatened by someone making finger guns in the air and filed a complaint. And I guess since that was creating a hostile work environment for that employee, they had to send a memo out that it was unacceptable behavior. Story 6. Not HR, but my company has had some serious WTF moments. Take down the pictures of World War II airplanes, because our German customers might take offense. Had a phantom pourer who wrote "duck you" on the wall in crap and pooped in a newly installed toilet. It wasn't even plumbed in yet. They just shat in a waterless toilet and left it for someone else to sort out. Had a guy who got caught sleeping at work for the 3rd time. When the shift leader gave him a talking to, the guy complained to HR that we were being victimized. During the subsequent investigation, it was found via CCTV that the worker was going to his car and shooting heroin. This was confirmed in a positive substances test. These are just the ones that jump out at me. Not what you would expect in a multi-billion-dollar aerospace engineering company. Story 7. Obligatory, not HR. But I once lightly tossed the keys to a fellow employee. It's something I often do, but this particular employee didn't like me. Later on, I was asked by my manager why I threw the keys at my coworker. Apparently, my coworker told them that I got angry and huffed and chucked the keys at his chest. I was utterly flabbergasted that I was considered to be the one in the wrong. When asked the standard, what should you do next time to make sure this doesn't happen again, I didn't know what to answer. I considered answering that maybe my coworker shouldn't be such a puss-ass Karen. Luckily, my team lead stepped in and told me the right answer was not to toss the keys next time. After the meeting, I busted up laughing. It became something of a running joke with my other coworkers whenever we tossed the keys to each other. Story 8. This was about 10 years ago. A guy in accounts pretended his wife had died. He faked her funeral, took compassionate leave, quite a lot of extra leave, as the wife was Indian, and he claimed he had to go to India to sort out her estate, was given 500-ish from an office collection. Unfortunately, he hadn't let his wife in on the scam, and she phoned the office looking for him one afternoon. I believe the complaint that came in from his supervisor was, ex's wife died. Well, I just had a phone call from the afterlife. He was fired on the spot, sued for his extra leave, and is the reason we ask grieving workers for death certificates before we allow any extra PTO. Story 9. Not HR, but I am the guy who gets complained about a lot. When I first started at the company, there were a lot of complaints about my cell phone usage. I figured that since my superiors used their phones to text in office and excuse themselves for phone calls in the parking lot, that I was allowed to. I explained that and was told my superiors would be spoken to. It's been 2 years, and those same people still do the same thing. It's been 2 years, and I'm still being accused of cell phone usage during office hours. I thought I had a brilliant idea back then by getting a cell phone stand for my desk. This way I could prop it up in the open for everyone to see. For 8 hours every day, it sat on the stand so that every person in the office could see that it stayed on a pedestal, unused. When I got promoted, the first thing my new superior talked to me about was watch the cell phone usage. It's a huge concern with a lot of people. 2. I was accused of nepotism when I was first hired. Someone stalked my Facebook and saw the ET director in some photos. Almost immediately, I was being accused of landing the job because she was my mom, like she isn't. She was my friend's girlfriend at the time, and not even in the same department as the hiring managers. What's more, the complaint came from the hiring manager. The person who hired me accused me and my mom of playing some kind of Jedi mind trick of social engineering on her to trick her into hiring me over the other 3 applicants. Even printed out our Facebook pages as proof and presented them to the CEO herself in an attempt to get us fired. 3. I was accused of clogging the drain with my food despite never eating at work. I have lunch at home with my roommate or at my buddy's office down the street. 4. I was accused of stealing coffee out of other people's personal coffee makers, despite always arriving with my Starbucks cup to be thrown away in the trash can out front. Never drank coffee in the office. 5. Despite being the only male in the office, I received a complaint for not flushing the urinal. I always do. So apparently one of the women in the office went into the male's bathroom for some reason, and I'm pretty sure it was just to find something to complain about. So I filed a counter complaint saying I felt harassed by having women in the male bathroom, and we both got written up. It's a fun office, let me tell you. Story 10. Have a huge list. Let's go. A manager complained that a guy's accent was too thick. After speaking with the manager, who frequently uses poor tasting slang, and the heavily accented gentleman, I can honestly say the manager was the issue, and they guy didn't have a thick accent. 2. Guy kissed his GF hello after finishing work. The act was reported homophobic as an act. 3. A guy kept asking other people if they're on break the same time as he to pray with him, frequently. 4. A woman called herself Karen, and another employee reported her for insulting an employee. Yes, the actual complaint stated she called herself Kareny. 5. Girl complained that another guy was stalking her every night. She would ask a guy to escort her to her car. It was the same guy. That one was weird. She actually used his parking space at his house to save money since he lived close to work. She then later complained that he stopped letting her do this. I can only assume due to the stalking complaint. There's a ton more added. 6. A manager reported every single one of his employees in his branch for coming in late. Turned out he told them to come to work an hour early, unpaid, but they came 15-30 minutes early instead, unpaid, so tried to write them all up. 7. A male customer called his boyfriend so gay. When the employee told him to not be homophobic, he replied, "They're gay and lovers." She then asked for them to kiss to prove it. That one had a ton of people in stitches over how this woman literally lives a Futurama skit life. Might not be Futurama, but I swear, I've seen a show where 2 people pretend to be gay and do a super awkward kiss. Story 11. One of my favorites from the other half, who is in... So, Mr. Blue and Ms. Pink work together for some time. At some point, their inter-office flirting becomes too much for Ms. Pink, and she goes to HR. Apparently, Mr. Blue has been sending her texts and making overtures that the married Ms. Pink does not want and needs to stop. Mr. Blue is pulled into HR and the go over his behavior. He's going to be suspended while they determine if he'll be terminated. This is inappropriate and borders on harassment. He seems to understand, but something is off with him. Then he asks, "Is she saying she didn't want me to do this?" "Yes," comes the answer. "This wasn't something coworkers do. You're single and don't understand the full scope of what's going on. Hold on a sec." Mr. Blue pulls out his phone and shows a text of Ms. Pink with her naked spread eagle along with a steamy note. Then another and another. "I'll send them to you for your research." HR regroups, ends the meeting, and does more investigation. Turns out they'd been screwing for months. Hubby was getting suspicious and she needed an out. They both got disciplined by HR, though her marriage fell apart and she had to carry the knowledge with her that most of HR had seen her body. Story 12. There's a SNL episode with John Cena giving a presentation on bananas, and I was at lunch with one of my coworkers, and we were quoting the episode. I said, "A banana is a yellow snack that monkeys eat," quoting the episode, and a female coworker near us was eating a banana at the time. She heard my comment, which was not directed toward her, and reported it to HR. I was fired a day later. I was called into HR to defend the allegation, and I was required to provide a written statement of my rendition. I wrote roughly the same thing I said above, that it wasn't directed towards anyone and wasn't supposed to be derogatory whatsoever. They still said it was inappropriate and gave me little to no closure as to specifically why, as well as why this was such a big issue. I did come after them with wrongful termination. After copious emails from both myself and an attorney, they chose to settle the matter by providing me with a few weeks of lost wages, a housing stipend to cover the living expenses of the apartment I was in at the time, and some other small fees. It amounted to a little less than $2,000. It was a hindrance to have to claim it all, but it eventually got done. Needless to say, it's a crafty company, and I'll never work there again, nor will I encourage anyone else to. The employee turnover ratio is extremely high for this specific reason. Story 13. I'm not HR, but we had an issue with scented stuff in our office. Some people had a sensitivity and there was little airflow, so if someone sprayed something, they had issues. That's not the bad part. It ended up being a feud between two sections that had to be mediated by HR. On the sensitive side, there was a supervisor who looked for reasons to write up those who might be wearing something scented. She tried to write up someone for wearing a scented deodorant and someone for carrying scented lotion in their purse. They hadn't even opened it. It didn't help that the sensitive one liked to claim a migraine and go home if she even suspected someone was wearing a scent. They ended up stopping the whole issue by setting a trap and mentioning the scent of some new lotion. They all talked about how good it smelled. Strangely, the sensitive one got a migraine, and the entire group was called into the office to be written up because even the supervisor could smell the non-existent lotion in her office. When called out on it, HR had to come in and put a stop to the whole issue. I understand that people have sensitivity to smells. I am one of them. Old lady perfume makes me have an asthma attack. And in the beginning, it was reasonable. People followed the rules, but this turned into a witch hunt on one side with someone taking advantage of it. At one point, the supervisor demanded to search people's purses and bags to make sure they weren't bringing in scented items, didn't even have to be using them. HR did tell her that was illegal though. Story 14, I am actually HR. I've had a few what the hell complaints. One employee complained about other people's perfume affecting her allergies, but wore heavy perfume herself. She said everything outside her home gave her allergies. With a doctor's note, she was allowed to work from home, but was more than happy to come to company events and get smashed. Yeah, makes total sense. 2. We had an employee who was abrasive, rude, arrogant, actively tried to get people fired, and was a little too flirtatious with some women. There were several complaints about the guy. The what the hell part of it is, no matter how much documentation we collected about the guy, the executives refused to discipline him because he had been at the company for 20 plus years and had a unique wealth of knowledge that would be extremely hard to replace. 3, we had an executive who scared her department so much, people were afraid to use the bathroom. If some people took maybe a minute too long in the bathroom, the supervisors grilled the person about where they were and sometimes penalized them for that. The supervisors were under so much pressure from the executive. It took a long time because people were too afraid, but finally, a few people came forward to us about the issue and we put a stop to that immediately. HR is an interesting world, but can be very stressful and at times a very lonely place to be. Story 15. I worked with these two guys where one would always try to get the other one wound up. The high-strung guy was always whining about stupid things. I had a whole file dedicated to this jackass's complaining. His best ones were, when I typed my name in the computer, it said diapers. By the end of the day, my desk was 2 feet closer to the copier. This morning, I hit my head with my phone. Everyone had been calling me Dwayne all day. I suspect Jim paid them to, a bunch of crap like that. Story 16. I'm not in HR, but I know those folks pretty well. My work used to let people dress up for Halloween each year. Company is about 350 people in size. People used to have a blast. There would be parties and contests for costumes and pumpkin carving, etc. I would guess about 65–70% of the building would really get into it every year. One lady complained to HR that some of the costumes were upsetting to her because they were satanic. We're talking vampires here, folks? Damn Dracula. Like the classic teeth, black cape, white skin template vampire we all know. That was the end of Halloween for the entire building. I hated that, Karen. Story 17. I'm not in HR, but this is a good place to tell a related story. One of our biggest customers is a large electronics manufacturing company in France and the UK. We regularly get visits from them for meetings about something or another. At one such meeting, one of the visitors told us about Steve. Steve always vanished during lunch break and nobody knew where he went, until he was discovered in the toilets one day. Another toilet user noticed a foot twitching beneath the cubicle door and called out, receiving no answer, so tried the door and obviously it was locked. Fearing the worst, he went for help. A first aider came back with him and called, no answer, so he entered the adjacent cubicle, stood on the bog, and looked over the partition wall. Steve was whacking away like his life depended on it. He received a warning for it. A few weeks later, it happened again, only this time it was a female first aider who got a free show. A month later, it happened again, only this time Steve didn't plug his earphones into his smartphone properly, and so was broadcasting the guttural sounds of a hardcore duck throughout the toilet. This was Steve's third and final warning, and he was fired. He claimed unfair dismissal on the grounds that nowhere in the employee handbook does it say that pleasure themselves was forbidden on company grounds. And it was during his own time and not during work time, and ended up getting his job back. Story 18. Not exactly HR, but I was almost fired for sniffing an egg, so probably about 5 years ago, I was working in a cocktail bar. Next door was a hotel. Same company and building, but separate business. Anyway, we'd occasionally borrow eggs from the kitchen in the hotel in order to make some cocktails. Didn't happen often enough to get our own. The kitchen were chill about it, though. Few months go by and there's a scandal. Turns out some staff, door staff, barbacks, bartenders, and chefs were eating food from the kitchen without paying for it. After the kitchen finished their stock take, they're down several hundreds of pounds, primarily due to poor stock rotation and wasting a ton of meat, but someone had to be held responsible. Cameras were installed and the people caught were fired. A few weeks later, I arrive at work to find a letter for me, asking to attend a meeting at 4 p.m. It was currently 3 p.m. So I go to my meeting, leaving the bar with the manager to run alone. Ironically, turned out he stole a crapload of cash from the bar. In the meeting, I was accused of stealing food, which I denied after they played a recording, low quality and black and white, showing me duck into the walk-in, grab something and put toward my face, eating, as the hotel manager insisted. Fortunately, I somehow remembered this exact day and was able to explain quickly. As for why I sniffed it, well, the egg smelled ducking gross, that's all. Sniffed an egg on a crap security camera. It looked like I was stealing food. Story 19. Not an HR person, but I'm good friends with the closest thing we have to one. And word just gets around at the company. A few girls are always stirring up trouble. The most ridiculous point being when two of them decided to shake things up by writing a guy up for pleasure in a company vehicle. The guy in question is a bit odd and vulgar, but he denied this completely. And people working with him, the date in question, came to his defense, saying it straight up couldn't have happened. About a week later, after the guy had been talked to numerous times and had a real chance of being fired, the girls decided to come forth and say they just made it up. Same girls, it was coffee time. So I went with them to the nearest coffee shop, minute drive away. On the way back, they saw a sex shop and wanted to check it out. I was a passenger, so couldn't just outright say no, but I said it was a bad idea and just stayed in the car. They spent 40 minutes in there and both came out with multiple bags of stuff. Our foreman was obviously not happy when we got back in an hour rather than 15-20 minutes. She made up some story about her being sick and needing to stop and use a bathroom for an extended period of time. When I reported their BS, she tried pitching me the same story, must have forgotten I was in the car. Story 20. I work in the ET depth for a major company who are getting behind saving the oceans in a big way and are doing their own project to help. Part of this was to change everyone's desktop background to a picture of 2 dolphins in open water. It was forced to everyone, but you can change it. We got a complaint on the very first day it was deployed because someone had a phobia of dolphins, and seeing this on everyone's screens was giving her severe anxiety. Laughs were had, and our build team were absolutely incredulous. They thought we were joking when we escalated it. Story 21. Not HR, but one thing I've learned is that people will always complain about something. Our company used to have an employee Christmas party, but due to numerous incidents involving people getting too drunk and growing awareness around drinking and driving, they stopped doing so. Completely understandable. The management still wanted to do something for the employees though, so alongside our Christmas bonus, they gave us our choice of a turkey or ham and a choice from 6 or so different kinds of liquor. Most people were pretty okay with this, but people started coming forth with complaints to HR like, they didn't have the kind of booze I like. I don't like turkey or ham. The company giving booze away is disrespectful of my religious views. The next year, they just gave a gift card to a grocery chain and one to the liquor commission. Once again, people complained about the booze part, so they were given 2 grocery cards instead. Eventually, they just stopped with the liquor commission cards and gave a large grocery card. People then complained that they don't like shopping at that particular chain. The company was planning on just not doing anything like this last year, but one owner made the last-minute decision to do so one more time, and it's likely that the whole thing will be abolished this year. Story 22. Not in HR, but when I was a waitress, there was this married couple that found something new to complain about every time they came in. The one that got me was, "Your booths are too tall. You need to lower them for us." Not only were these the same exact booths that they had sat in several dozen times previously without any issue, but also were permanently bolted to the wall. Because, they're booths. Story 23. Not HR, but I once had to sign an agreement that if the faucet washer got stolen again, I would be fired along with everyone on my shift. You know that little metal ring on kitchen faucets that screws into the spout and keeps the water flowing in a nice steady stream? Someone kept taking it. To make matters worse, we worked third shift with 5 people in the entire building, whereas the normal shift had over 300 people, but for some reason, they wanted to pin this on us. We got blamed for everything there. Product missing, things not getting done, orders not going out. We didn't ship anything on our shift. In a company of 305 people, those last 5 people took all the heat for everything. To be honest, it probably was our shift who took the washer, or more specifically, one guy. This one guy from Vietnam, I live in the US, who was a legal US resident for close to 20 years and spoke very little English. He would just walk out with things he needed. Tape guns, boxes of tape, box cutters, anything, like it was nothing. Not stealing, since he used it at work. He could take it home. It was probably him taking the washer. I don't know. I quit a few days after signing the agreement. Story 24. Where I work, we have mandatory harassment prevention training. The person who teaches it told us that they had, in the recent past, received some complaints about people holding the door open for them. The lady felt she was getting harassed because of it. They mentioned they didn't do anything about it except try and explain to the lady that the person was more than likely just being nice. I'm sure that was a WTF moment, story 25. I work in it, but sit in the HR office, so I overhear everything we've had. The office is too hot. Fix the AC, which we did at a cost. The office is too cold. Can something be done about it? Same folks as above. They would wear scarves at their desk, but they sit next to the server room, basically. So I told them to duck off, basically, after HR asked me if I could turn it up. How come Dave is allowed his tattoo on show, but mine isn't? Well, Jeff, your tattoo on your forearm is off a naked lady, and we have clients in the building this week. I'm sick. Can I go home? We just watched you eat a Big Mac meal and a foot-long Subway. So, yeah, but unpaid. They didn't go home. He won't talk to me. She won't shut up. That department is too noisy. They are distracting my team. They were the call center staff. They are on the phones all the time. Unlike your accounts department, they are bound to be loud. Story 26. Not complaints, but accommodation requests at a large cable internet provider. A call center agent requested to be allowed to use a coloring book and crayons. Why taking calls? Another call center agent wanted to be moved to a different location because she was in the witness protection program. About 12 requests a month for call center agents to sit on exercise balls. For safety and liability reasons and your lack of a doctor's recommendation for that, no. Another call center agent requested a bathroom break every 6 minutes, and another requested his Issa dog to come with him to work for his bipolarism. Coworkers complained that the dog stunk and wasn't groomed. Then we learned that the director of the call center was highly allergic to dogs. Before we had to come up with a decision, he up and quit mid-shift because his vacation request wasn't approved after only being employed for about 26 days. Story 27. When I was a shift manager at a convenience store, I had a cashier just decide to take off her shoes and socks because she was uncomfortable. This isn't the WTF moment. The WTF moment was when I informed my boss and he said not to worry about it. I left that job 2 months later and she was still doing the same thing. Maybe it's just me, but if I walked into a store and saw that, I'd walk right back out. I should also point out that I did talk to the cashier in question multiple times before I informed my boss, and we did have pads so that your feet didn't hurt. Story 28. HR. We had a very homophobic woman who worked right next to the gay man, too small of an office to shift them away. They worked in the same department. We had this temp who wound up going to a sales position at a competitor we bought out. Part of the contract was we couldn't fire him. He flirts with quality control and drives me insane, but I can't do anything about it. The manager's crazy and has a personal vendetta against me, and often upsets his employees and makes a mess for me. He's upset 2 employees to the point of compensation, dated his superior, and used slurs around the office. This one guy would always attempt to drive another guy crazy. He was doing pranks like putting his stuff in the vending machine, Jell-O, or putting his desk in the bathroom. Story 29. Not HR, but I got a complaint against an employee who reports to me. Important to note, this was a 10 billion company. The dude doing the complaining had 30 years of industry experience and all the fancy corporate training in the world. The email goes something like this. From TPS, subject line. I want to bring to your attention that Mr. X has been seen way too much time at the company cafeteria. This is having a negative impact on the morale of my team. Please make sure you reprimand him for his unprofessional behavior. Hope you take this feedback from an experienced colleague in good spirits. On a side note, what is the status of the Cisco load balancer my team ordered 2 days ago from the Netherlands? This is project critical. Please ensure delivery by tomorrow. Body of the email. Warm regards. TPS browsers at that time would truncate subject lines based on your device's screen size, so I had to extend my laptop's display onto a monitor to recover the entire subject line. What the hell, man? Story 30. A complaint raised through the union that half of the staff's smoking deck was essentially unusable when it rained and additional overhead coverage was requested so that people could keep dry and smoke. For reference, this is a 24/7, 300 and some business with 2,000 employees now. This is a perfectly reasonable request. Why nobody had formalized the request until then, I don't know. But either way, we were able to arrange for the installation of the extra coverage to be included in some upcoming works the following week, and were even able to limit the closure of the space to 12 hours. We put signs up giving just over a week's advance notice that the smoke deck would be closed for 12 hours, starting in the middle of the night, finishing in the afternoon. While additional coverage was installed at the request of staff, thanking for understanding and apologizing for inconvenience, we received more complaints from the union about the closure and not providing an alternate location for the 12 hours than we did for the initial problem. Story 31. HR for a tech company. I was friends with one of the tech support guys. He seemed like a normal guy. We got on, went for lunch a few times. Anyway, a couple of months later, I get a complaint from one of the PAs. After spending some time and looking into the complaint, we find out that this guy had got her number from our system and started harassing the poor girl, pushing her into going out on a date with him. Non-stop harassment. This guy would talk to me about his marriage and his kids, so finding out about what he had put this girl through was very surprising. Anyway, we got rid of him. He tried to reach out to me outside work, but that ship had sailed. Story 32. Not in HR, but friend gave me her organization's Karen list a week or so ago. The highlights were: 1. Free omelet day wasn't inclusive enough because they were vegan, so they wanted it canceled. 2. Server room was too cold. 3. Joe has too many pictures of his kids on his desk. It is distracting. 4. Someone keeps parking in my space. Building doesn't have assigned parking. They had just claimed a space as theirs is. 5. Bell on the microwave is too distracting. Everyone should be sure to stop their food before it goes off. 6. Blow dryer in the bathroom. Didn't last long enough, had to press the activation button multiple times. 7. Like 20 complaints about what other people choose to eat, including too spicy, too stinky, takes too long to cook in the microwave, and not locally sourced. Story 33. I'm waiting for you to have a complaint against me. I eat my lunch at morning tea time, about 10:30 a.m. Always have. I keep getting complaints to me that I'm making people hungry too early with the smell of my food, usually pasta or similar. At some point, it will annoy someone enough to raise the issue higher up, I reckon. Story 34. I was an in-house employment lawyer who worked with HR. The weirdest one was that Bob would always go missing, so could they follow him? Sure. So they followed him down to the meeting rooms where he would go room to room gathering food that had been catered for the various meetings before the attendees got out for lunch or snacks or whatever. Suspecting mental illness, we asked him to get an evaluation, and while gone, discovered literally thousands of stale cookies crammed into his desk drawers and credenza. Also, my coworker, a lawyer, who got a doctor's note, purportedly, excusing him from ever having to talk to our boss. No, it doesn't work that way. Story 35. Not HR, but we had a woman in our office who would always loudly complain when she had to replace the bottled water, as apparently every time she went to use it, it was empty. This did not take into account the following facts. 1. This wasn't true. Everybody else did in fact replace bottles, myself included. 2. She probably filled up her water bottle 8 times a day, so chances were good that she'd be the one to drain it. Karma is a Karen, because her complaining pissed me off so much that I actually took to not replacing it even when nearly empty, just to further piss her off. It's the little things. Story 36. A worker had to go visit the client's offices in a different country. The first weekend comes by. We get a call from the hotel that we booked for him charging us for the total loss of the room. It turns out that this person somehow triggered the fire alarm by putting a lighter under the smoke sensor, causing the fire sprinkler system to be activated, flooding the whole room, as well as part of the floor where his room was. He still to this day claims he didn't mean for the fire alarm to go off. Story 37. Not quite HR, but my company occasionally does lunch and learn events during our hour lunch break where you sign up beforehand and go to an hour-long seminar training type thing where lunch is provided. Just a month or two ago, an office-wide email was sent out about an upcoming lunch and learn on a Thursday. One of our consultants hit reply all and said, "This is the actual email. You guys keep setting up lunch and learns for Thursdays and Fridays. I don't work those 2 days. As the guru of training, you may want to improve your scheduling. This is an office of 200 plus people, and this email went to everyone, including our top management." Story 38. When my employer was purchased out of bankruptcy by a private corporation, the new owners sent all office personnel a notice that stated all office staffers would be required to wear a business suit at all times. The HR director, a very wonderful woman, about 60 years old, promptly turned in her resignation. If she could not wear blue jeans and a blouse to work, she wasn't interested in keeping her job. The entire office staff notified the new front office that if an exception was not made for the HR lady, they would also quit. An exception was made for her. Story 39. Called me on my day off. Staff. I am full-time. Why the hell don't I have 40 hours next week? I can't pay my bills with only 2 shifts. This is bullcrap. Me. Blink, blink. You requested 3 days off that don't fall on your regularly scheduled days off, which left me 2 days to schedule you. Staff. Yeah, but I only have so much vacation pay to use. This is bullcrap. I work my ass off and my hours get cut. This went on for a while. Didn't matter how I explained the situation, I was the bully and she was the victim. Story 40. Not HR, but had someone submit a complaint about me. I was doing temp work at a heating and plumbing company. Answer the phones and stuff. But there was this one girl that just hated me. I guess I was too happy to be employed. Anyway, I go in one day, and the owner pulls me into the office. I have to get a substances test done because I'm too energetic, and I blow my nose frequently. I am a morning person, and I have allergies. The results come back negative. The owner apologizes, and I quit on the spot. Story 41. After a promotion at a previous job, I was given my first employee to manage. After the first day of training, she complained that it was bullcrap that she agreed to take this job only to find out there was no immediate benefits regarding maternity leave. Turns out she was 6 months pregnant and was only looking for a job that would pay maternity leave. My boss told her not to bother coming back for training the next day. Story 42. I had a talking to once by my boss because I had asked a worker under me to report to me, not straight to my boss. My boss and this worker are friends. A different person working under me went straight to my boss after the first person kept on doing it for various reasons, asking when he'd be paid because he hadn't for 2 weeks. Dude was fired the same day. Handily, I was fired not long after that. Don't hire friends if you can't be professional. Story 43. Chewing too loud. Typing too loud. Had to go home because it's too cold. Hottest month on record. AC in server room next room over is dying. They can hear him. Direct quote. Apparently, he was laughing from across the building, not loudly, and they were not okay with it. Story 44. My father worked HR for a number of years and always had good stories to tell. One of the employees sat on a yoga ball instead of a chair due to medical reasons, and this really rubbed one of the other employees the wrong way. So the ball-less employee came to see my father to see if there was anything he could do to get rid of it. My father told the man there was nothing he could do, as he handed him a thumbtack. Story 45. I work as an intern in an office of 30 people. A couple days ago, I received a complaint to my manager because an employee said, the intern complained that the company doesn't buy enough muffins for the employees. What actually happened was I walked to the table for a muffin, didn't see any, and said, "Aw man, I wish there were more muffins." Story 46. I had one against me when I worked at a college. Her complaint was, I was being ideologically insensitive. That is seriously what she put down. This is because she said something really dumb and insisted that is way the world should be. And I walked her through her own argument, pointing out every part that would not work. And in fact, something bad movie villains do, collective punishment. Basically tossed it out and told me to just not do it again. Story 47. Had a very, very bad employee years ago. He once went to HR and his union rep to complain that I had no right to tell him what to do. He further explained that as a black man, you couldn't expect him to listen to a woman. There were many, many amazing statements that came from him. Story 48. Email sent out to the entire company. If anyone catches the associate who is leaving the second floor kitchen sponge in the condition shown, some yogurt in it, without rinsing and wringing it out, please let me know who it is so I can file an official complaint with HR. This same crime has occurred at least 15 times, and it's time to bring the culprit to justice. Thanks. Story 49. This girl I work with has a major case of resting Karen face. She is actually one of the sweetest people. Someone put in a complaint about her for face threats. I thought it was a joke at first. Story 50. I'm only coming to complain about this person because I think they're going to complain about me, but I didn't do anything wrong and didn't even want to come to HR to tell you this. Story 51. Not in HR, but as a team lead in software development. One programmer complained to me, then another programmer was bouncing his leg too much and it was distracting. Come on, you guys are adults getting paid big money as consultants, and you're too shy to talk to someone about something so minor. Story 52. Since a new company moved in on the floors below in our building, the elevators take too long and make too many stops. This was a major complaint to HR. Believe it or not, after a year of this, we actually moved offices. The new building we are in has even worse elevator issues. So ridiculous. Story 53. Had a morbidly obese employee who was a really good worker, but did not take enough care in personal hygiene. People near his cubicle started to complain of bad body odor. That was probably the most awkward HR moment I had to deal with. Story 54. Not HR, but we had a flame going once about someone taking coupons from company cereals, which in result were falling out of the hole in the packaging. Story 55. I once had a temp job in an HR department, which involved scanning and sorting decades worth of paper employee files. Horribly dull job, but getting to read old HR complaints was a bright spot. I once found a complaint that someone's manager had accused a staff member of witchcraft. Story 56. I was called due to a fight on the deposit of the store. Two employees was fighting with acetylene torches cause of the fight. They said that one of them drank water using the other guy cup. Story 57. The use of red ink in correcting a new employee's work was banned because it might hurt someone's feeling. At a government job where we're all adults, I used every color as close to red as I could get after that. It's not the pen's fault their work was terrible. Story 58. Not in HR, but used to manage people. Had an employee get upset about a Harambe meme another employee had in his cubicle. It was the "take a shot for Harambe because he took one for you." Story 59. Not my story, but my friend had to deal with two people who disliked each other so much. One literally farted on the other, walking by as he sat, and the one who was farted on reported it. They had to make hard copy documentation of this incident. Story 60. Had to put up signs so that the operators knew not to wash their feet in the toilets and sinks. The follow-up was when I handed the quote over to maintenance for a foot washing station. Still had people washing their feet in the toilets for months. Story 61. Someone is changing the valve stem caps on my car. They were all gray, but now I have one black one. Will you call the state patrol and have them investigate? I almost started laughing thinking it was a joke, but she was dead serious. Story 62. At my previous company, we had a woman submit an HR complaint against the fire safety officer because she didn't like the way he was trying to make her move faster during a fire drill. Story 63. My worst was so-and-so coming into my office, complaining that XYZ got to go to the bathroom more than she did. We work a desk job, just stand up and go pee. For HR people, what ridiculous complaints you have covered? Story 1. Not in HR, but I had a subordinate complaint to HR about another subordinate receiving a post-it note message from me, but her not getting one. I'm pretty sure the complainant was gently insane. Story 2. Two consenting adults had a relationship. They broke up amicably. One reparteed a few months later. The other was jealous and put in a series of vexatious complaints about how he was making her uncomfortable, that he was giving her eyes in the office, even that he was stalking her outside of work and leaving her notes and gifts. She planted evidence. Didn't realize she was on camera. Police were involved. She put in a workplace injury claim for stress, and it was approved. I never saw her again. Meanwhile, he had to pick up his life, get an AVO, and I'm pretty sure it ruined his new relationship. She was psychotic. Another woman put in complaints about everyone she worked with. Peers, manager, second-line manager, up. When we moved her to another team to start fresh at her request, she then did the same. Nothing really of substance apart from people kind of excluding her. And I don't really blame them. She was high maintenance, and I'm sure not fun to be around. At some point, the common denominator is you. Lots of perfectly reasonable complaints too. Some unfortunate behavior can happen in workplaces. Story 3. Two fun ones. 1. Had someone complain about their company card being switched off when they spent their entire food budget for a 2-month sales trip to the US in 3 weeks. Mind you, this was a $200 per day budget. They liked truffle steak, apparently. 2. One employee complained about another employee getting promoted. First employee didn't even work in the same department, team, or field, and weren't qualified for the job in any way. Story 4. HR matter, not a person, but Chicken Gate. One of my team members made an HR complaint because she felt discriminated for not being catered for at another colleague's farewell lunch. The team had Red Rooster. She apparently needed to have boneless chicken as she was worried of choking on a chicken bone. I was drinking on a Friday afternoon in South Bank, and it was a beautiful summer day when I got the call. I wish I was making this up. She resigned a few months later. Story 5. I worked for a large business with like thousands of people in a CBD skyscraper, and we had a dude who had sensitivity to smell. Whilst I appreciate it was a legitimate issue, he went on a campaign to stop people having any scents in the office. No cologne, perfume, deodorant, hairspray, basically nothing with artificial smells. He put up signs in the lift while saying, "Your perfume is my poison." He went on to go to HR and complain that we were forcing him to work in a literal toxic environment. Story 6. I got pulled in for a conversation with HR when I was 21 because a male middle-aged coworker was upset. I don't say good morning to him each day. We didn't even work in the same department, but HR requested I go out of my way to say hello to keep the peace. Story 7. Okay, I have many. One really stupid one springs to mind. An employee's wife was having an affair at her workplace with a customer. The customer's wife showed up at our workplace to complain about the employee's wife having an affair with her husband. Expected I would address it with my employee. Story 8. I had a guy who didn't want to be greeted when he came in each morning. His manager was too cheerful and it put him under too much stress. Apparently a cheery, "Good morning," really meant, "You better be ready to get lots of sales today, boy." I told him that was unreasonable and we would not be addressing it. This guy stuck with me. He wore the same musty Punk Floyd t-shirt every day under his suit, would throw a tantrum if anyone touched his spoon in the kitchen, it wasn't his spoon, and when he quit and walked out with no notice was shocked when we stopped paying him. Story 9. I'm not sure why, but this made me want to submit every single minor complaint I have to HR. The air conditioning is too cold. The person next to me types loudly. There aren't enough meeting room, so on and so forth. You won't have to do a formal investigation into the person next to me's typing. I'll just hear. Story 10. I've had a few as a manager, not HR. I had a senior manager complain that they didn't get their own birthday cake in the monthly office birthday celebration. The lights in the office were too bright. They then proceeded to unscrew every second light bulb. I then had to reprimand them for A, unscrewing the light bulbs without permission, B, doing said unscrewing unsafely, C, ruining everyone else's work environment. Had an employee complain her chair was uncomfortable and requesting a $1,500 ergo chair that she should be allowed to take home whenever she wanted. I've had a few more over the years. Sigh. Story 11. An employee was having an affair with someone's wife. Wife wrote to HR advising that our employee was having it off with her husband and that it is bringing the name of our company into disrepute and that in the interests of the employee's safety, we should suspend her, as the wife's family members may come looking for the employee at the office. Story 12. I was HR adjacent, DHS. I had my own colleague complain to my manager that I typed too loudly. So they bought me a silent keypad. We worked in a shared office with 8 other people who all used the exact same keyboard, and they never said a word. The stories I could share, that was one of the most tame. Let's just say this person would ask me if I was missing chromosomes for asking a question and left the company after the substances van was called in. They came to work with their jeans completely unzipped and sagging on their last day. Story 13. Not HR, but once I worked where you could play music. We got told to turn it off because it was demonic. Some lady didn't like Tool, apparently. Once someone put in Teams the person's name and complained about them not wearing shoes in the office and how it made her uncomfortable. I also was once called a Karen openly in a Teams chat with our entire team of 50 or so people, including managers and directors. And no one said, boo. Story 14. Unfortunately, many of the complaints we receive are gravely serious, harassment, etc. But I've had the gold standard of ridiculous employee 1 complaints that employee 2 saves up farts for when they are near employee 1, just to mess with them. I've also now had 2 separate incidents in different workplaces of someone crapting on the floor in the toilets, but not in the stall. Story 15. I usually do TA. I've covered HR generalist roles at times. The pettiest one I got was a complaint a person was opening the Venetian blinds too aggressively each morning. Close second was, person A looked at me funny in the lift. I honestly couldn't do HR because I would end up losing my crap at this kind of ridiculousness. Story 16. Someone was wearing runners in the office. They'd been doing it for 3 days. That's against the dress code. If they could do it, everyone else should be able to wear comfortable shoes to work too. Explained that the particular employee had a broken foot and a medical certificate for shoes that didn't aggravate the injury. But it's against the dress code. It's not fair. Story 17. My husband once had to deal with an employee who got into a fight with a bollard. Yes, a bollard. It was there first. It was all caught on camera. Think the employee got dismissed. Story 18. We were out of coffee. She sits next to the office manager, but walked to the other side of the office to tell HR. There was a cafe downstairs, but she said people would riot. Story 19. I was formerly HR. I worked in a team where prior to me starting a new hire, insisted the HR team inform everyone who worked at that site that she had previously contracted chlamydia. The new hire thought it could be passed on to others via toilet seats. She was gone within the week. Story 20. Oh, I thought of another one. A guy put in a complaint because members of a team referred to each other by nicknames, and he felt he was being bullied and excluded because they referred to him by his actual name. He was such a flog. Story 21. I got accused of telling someone they were a bad mother as they were downing buckets of Coronas. The issue was she said that, and there were 10 people present who confirmed I had 1 beer and left early without even talking to the person. Story 22. Not in HR, but literally overheard HR complain to another HR about employees not knowing how to read English, blaming them for asking simple questions about their contract to the company. Pretty poor thing to do, in my opinion. Story 23. Not HR, but a colleague complained that I put in an email, even though she repeatedly did that to me. The office manager, cosplaying as HR, took her seat and I got yelled at over the phone when I was during lockdowns. Story 24. I don't think we should trust anything HR says, maybe. Let's ask, what have they covered up as they sold their soul to companies who hate them also? HR professionals, what's the funniest thing you've ever seen at work? Story 1. I work for my dad's construction company. I'm HR, safety, compliance, facilities, and other miscellaneous stuff. We have about 70 EECLIs. We have a strong level of longevity in management. Most of them were hired by my grandpa and watched me grow up. To say things are family style and informal would be an understatement. Sometimes I feel like this place is the equivalent of the office. I came on the team 7 years ago to handle safety, and about 3 weeks in, I asked my dad, who is HR? He fired finger guns at me and walked away. Thus began my career in HR. I learned everything, trial by fire. Luckily, I have a lot of support from brokers and labor attorney. So, one day during my first couple years, one of the shop foremen walked an applicant into my office. Now, this normally implied we're hiring this guy, make that happen. So that's exactly what I did. Hired for an entry-level position at our entry-level pay. Turns out, the foreman brought him in to interview because this kid was the son of one of our half-brained drivers. My first indication should have been that his nickname was Cheeto. Other indications, does not have his own cell phone, uses his brother's when he needs to, did not sign up for direct deposit because, and I quote, me and Chase Bank had a falling out. I didn't even know how to ask a follow-up to that. Well, right off the bat, the kid was chronically late, calling in sick, and was generally a waste of space. Some people just aren't thinkers. Last straw, about 3-4 weeks in. I get a text from him at 5 a.m. Hey, I forgot to tell you I have jury duty today. Send me a picture of your jury duty slip. I'm trying, but my camera on my phone isn't working. Okay, you need to bring that slip into my office first thing tomorrow morning. Okay, can't talk anymore. Walking into jury duty right now. It was 6 a.m. at this point. Next morning, doesn't come into my office. I call him in, ask for his slip. Oh, my brother cleaned up yesterday and threw it away. Does your brother clean a lot? No, but he did yesterday. And so last night, he threw away the one piece of official documentation you needed to keep your job? Yeah. And your trash pickup was this morning, I assume? Yeah, but I still have proof I went to jury duty, kid you not. This kid pulled out his phone, showed me his iCal, where he wrote in jury duty. I stared blankly at him because I was honestly unsure if he was dumb enough to believe that was proof, or if he just thought I was dumb enough to believe it was proof. I asked him if I could see the camera function on his phone. When he declined, I fired him. I also created a hiring authorization form that must be signed by one of 3 individuals before I'll begin the hiring process. Or again. Story 2. So I worked at a hip-hop related organization. I had a little more budget for employee appreciation since some of our managers, including me, decided to take a small pay cut instead of cut anyone's hours more. At the end of the year, we had a little leftover, and there was no way to return that to managers or make that into a bonus for weird legal reasons. So we used it for employee appreciation. I, being the cool HR, instantly rule out a pizza party. So we put it into employee appreciation. My idea was cool bomber jackets with a company logo instead of lame water bottles or fleece jackets. Other cool ideas came up like enamels for 2- and 5-year anniversary, come together and make a cool pattern or a custom piece of graffiti from a local artist. The one that won out per our boss was gold grills, like gold tops on your teeth. My assistant, who is the world's whitest person, pulls me over and is like, no way, I'm not gonna go out there and be a wealthy white woman from Moneytown, California with a gold grill. I think, yeah, this is kind of a stupid idea, but the boss isn't listening to me. So I'll call the lawyer who surely will tell me I shouldn't do this. The lawyer says, yeah, that's probably fine. I don't think there is a clear case for discrimination here. I'm ducking stupefied. I go home like, man, this is so ducking stupid. And it hits me. Wait, what if you just don't have teeth? So I call the lawyer back to discuss, is it discrimination if an employee reward is a gold grill? If they don't have teeth, as people without teeth are prone to being in another protected class? The lawyer's laughing her ass off at me because I'm sincerely trying to professionally and legally cover my ass. The compromise was, if you are unable to get a gold grill, you get a nice pair of sneakers. I'm not at the job anymore, but I do have a really nice pair of sneakers I only wear on nice occasion. So whenever explaining benefits, the exchange would go something like this, me. Yeah, so we have medical, dental, 401k, auto reimbursement, a gold grill. New person, wait, what? Me. Oh, medical, auto. New person. No, that last one. Me. A gold grill new person. Are you serious about that? Because that sounds cool, but I just need to make sure you aren't messing with me. Me. Yeah, I'm not boss. Put on the grill. Show them the grill. my assistant, and one of the managers, who knows I hate grills in the background with muffled laughter. This was all very funny because of how seriously I took my job, story 3. During an investigation, I traveled to a work site I had never been to before. I was investigating a conflict of interest case in which a manager may have been engaging in a sexual relationship with a direct report. We had received a 15-second home video of the two going at it from an anonymous source that triggered the investigation and prompted me to fly out and interview both parties. I arrived at the site and explained to the manager I needed to speak with him in private, and I asked if he had any offices at his building that were not currently in use. He led me to a room at the end of the hall. As he opened the door, I recognized the room from the video immediately. It was one of the most awkward interviews I've ever conducted, but I later laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. Story 4. There's a few that cracked me up. Once got asked to look into someone's social media posting because he used his personal account to advertise posts for the business, which was mostly pretty tame professional stuff, but then there was a huge block of photos from when he was Mr. Leather Daddy Toledo, Ohio 2009, not the real city or year, where he was, well, pretty much exactly what you expect. And if you search that same competition, you could find much more graphic photos very easily. They weren't adult film, but they were way outside what you'd find acceptable for work. Leashes and harnesses and people role-playing. Had to have a brief professionalism refresher and a reminder that the internet is very public. Once got a report that a roving field employee was hard to find and they thought he wasn't actually working his shift. He had a company truck with a GPS, so we tracked it down to one of our locations that was vacant. Caught him with a lady who was not his wife in the middle of the afternoon. She ran out of there as quick as she could. I'll never forget the, "oh crap," when I knocked on the door. Many years before COVID, in the early days of Zoom meetings, we used to have a weekly meeting with division heads who were in different locations. The CEO figured out the get dressed above the waist trick and called out one of our regional VPs to stand up during the meeting. He was, as you'd expect, wearing basketball shorts to go with his full suit jacket and tie. We all chuckled, but over the next few weeks, it turned into a competition between all of these remote VPs of who could wear the weirdest bottoms during the call. That company sucked, but that was always fun. One guy got lederhosen. This has happened several times, but having to talk to someone about any issue and they try to big time you by claiming they're in tight with the CEO or they're too important to deal with XYZ and doubling down by emailing the CEO to complain about what they got in trouble for. This almost always ends in very rapid termination when the CEO sends a follow-up email that's usually to the effect of, "Who the duck is this person and why are they talking to me?" Story 5. Received an unexpected visit from the warden of the local prison. He asked if a certain licensed clinical social worker was our employee. She was. He then gave me a CD to listen to. Yes, this was a while ago. Calls to prisons are recorded, and all parties are apprised of this at the onset of every phone call. This was a recording of a conversation between our employee and a client who had been incarcerated for violating the terms of his parole. Client made a death threat in prison and was placed on watch, which also meant 100% lack of privacy in a special cell. During the call, our employee coached the client on what to say to the prison psychiatrist in order to get taken off death watch. 2. Did a guided meditation that had him imagine sitting on her kitchen floor with her, drinking a bottle of wine. He had a major addiction issues. 3. Told him, "I love you." I called her in and informed her of the investigation. She tried to deny everything even after I told her about the recording. Eventually, she confirmed her conduct, signed a statement, and agreed not to discuss the situation with anyone, including the client, while we determined next steps. We put her on administrative leave. Our CEO was not quick to fire and wanted time to consider the circumstances, plus I think she hoped the employee would show contrition and learn her lesson. The prison warden was back the next day with a new recording of our employee speaking with their inmate. In a panicky tone, our employee told her now former client that she had to make the call quick because she wasn't allowed to speak with him, and then proceeded to hatch a crackpot plan to maintain contact, using another name. All this on a recorded line. Story 6. Had an employee who was very clearly living in his Sprinter van in our parking lot and using toilets and shower at the office, so I had to tell him he couldn't do that. He made over $200K, so it was a choice, not a lack of resources. He then made up a whole story about moving into an apartment and would share pics on Slack that were obviously AI generated. I left before it was resolved. It was very weird. This wasn't even my first employee who lived in the parking lot. Just the first to use fake images, like he wasn't still living in his van in the parking lot. Story 7. An employee coming in shorts, even though safety regulations say long pants are mandatory, because he needed to show off his new ankle monitor that he got for beating someone up. Another requesting parental leave, not realizing he actually needed to become a parent for that. Another I had to reprimand for doodling junks on bags of product. Funniest must have been the guy who complained about his manager using spyware or other methods of monitoring him, since his manager always seemed to know immediately when he was on Facebook. Didn't realize his manager was facing him, and he was sitting with his back to the window, so his manager could see the reflection of his screen. Story 8 was in a very tense call between HRIS, HR Ops, TA leadership, and our product team hashing out a misalignment on the procurement of a new tea sourcing tool. There was clearly tension between the product lead and the TA director. Toward the end of the call, the TA director's kid got on camera and we all waved him off as he and his mom headed out for the day. The product lead, who was heading up the call, seemed super annoyed and redirected us all back to the discussion. She said a few things and tied the call off by asking if anyone had any question. It was silent for a moment, so we were all prepping to hit the leave button until someone's audio piped up with a question. I could see everyone's face drop as the question started. It didn't register right away, so we all stopped to listen intently and realized it was the TA director's audio asking, "Want to pleasure but don't have a partner?" He had teed up an adult video as his kid and wife were walking out and forgot to mute. Here was a group of maybe 8 people from different departments all stopping to listen to this question that turned out to be the T director's computer talking dirty to him. The product lead looked pissed as hell. As it continued to stream in the background, she just said, "Okay," as everyone laughed on their way out of the call. A week later, got the call from HR for HR. Story 9, fired a woman who was likely impaired. I say likely because even if she wasn't safe to do the job. I walked her outside after explaining 3 times in detail why she was fired. 15 min later, I get panicked calls from employees saying that she was sitting back at her desk like nothing happened. I went and got her and again told her she was fired and had to leave. She said, "So, go home?" Had an employee get fired and then send a Venmo request to a member of leadership for money to pay her bills a few weeks later. Years ago, fired someone because she looked up a patient who was a nurse practitioner's phone number and then texted that patient asking her to write a script for pain pills. After she was fired, she texted her coworkers asking for money. Had an employee quit in the middle of a harassment investigation to become a professional ninja warrior in training. A few months later, got a letter from a local PD asking for reference for him as a cop. I called the captain and said, "I never called you, but I would not live in your town if this person was a cop." A patient who was a veterinarian, woman, was stalking her provider, male, to include showing up at his family's property. She asked me if I was going to arrest her, and I had to tell her, "I'm not the cops, but I'll call them if you don't stop." Story 10. In my first job as an HR assistant, I worked in a building where there was no receptionist at the front desk, and my office was the closest to the front door, so I inherited directing people places or answering questions when people were lost and trying to get somewhere. I got a call from a hiring manager for our food and nutrition department that someone was walking around campus looking for him for an interview. Since I worked with the recruiters, I knew the schedule and that there was no interview on the calendar and no one had showed up for an interview. As soon as I hung up the phone, a foreign couple, I live in the US, who spoke only Polish, was trying to communicate with me. They could not understand me, and I could not understand them. Luckily, the guy had a phone with Google Translate, so he kept passing his phone back and forth to translate what each other was saying. His wife applied for a job and misunderstood the canned email that said we would be in touch for an interview if her qualifications are sufficient. It took 20 minutes of passing his phone back and forth for him to understand they shouldn't have shown up, and why they were let into the campus was another question I never got answered. It was just funny to me, and did not expect to be doing that. Story 11. Our facility is in the greater NYC area, so folks at our location were the first in the company to get COVID. Corp told us to test employees weekly and send home anyone who tested positive. This pissed off our GM because we won't have cases if we don't test. He comes down to HR and is yelling about how we need to be discreet about notifying folks who test positive, which we were, of course. We're HR for Pete's sake, whatever. About 20 minutes later, more test results come back and we had multiple positive results. The next thing you know, GM and assistant GM come running down the main hall and then go running into the warehouse to watch the HR reps talking to the folks who tested positive to ensure they're doing it correctly. They're yelling, "You take receiving, I'll take shipping," and causing a decidedly indiscreet ruckus. Once they are out of earshot, my boss and I shake our heads because we were accused of indiscretion by a raving lunatic. About 5 minutes later, we see 2 maintenance guys wearing full biohazard gear, helmets, gloves, booties, the works, pulling giant tanks of some sort of cleaning solution into the warehouse. We lost it. My stomach hurt from laughing, and my boss had tears rolling down his face. The warehouse folks are panicking, and we can't even speak because we're laughing too hard. It was classic. Story 12. At my previous employer, my predecessor had maintenance install an indoor mail slot into the door. It was the worst. People would constantly open the mail slot flap, bend down, and see if I was in the office. I had created a status board to hang on my door that would show if I was in a meeting, on the floor, out of the office, etc. The sign would literally say I'm in a meeting, and people would still knock and, within seconds, bend down and peek through the mail slot. I hated it. One time, in that office, I was supporting a new manager and delivering a corrective action to an associate with terrible attendance. My board said in a meeting. Someone decided to come by with cookies, and seeing that my board said in a meeting, they shoved their hand to the mail slot with a bag of cookies. To cut the tension in the room, the first thing my brain thought to say out loud was, "That's just my substances dealer." Everyone laughed. I have no idea why I said that. I don't do substances, and I've never done substances. Another time, I had an employee ask me for a copy of their taxes. I asked if she meant a copy of her W-2 from the previous year. Nope. Her filed completed taxes. I advised that we don't have that access. Story 13, I worked as an in hospitality. Our recently promoted Spanish-speaking housekeeping manager was sitting in the break room with everyone, casually eating her lunch. I was making my rounds through all of the associate areas and saw her drinking a twisted tea. I immediately texted her to come to my office and bring her lunch and drink in there. I asked if she knew what she was drinking, and she said, "Oh yes, this is an iced tea." She legitimately had no idea that there was alcohol in it, and said that there was a case of them in the staff fridge. So she thought that we put them in there for everyone to drink. I assume one of our housekeepers found it in one of their rooms that day and thought they were non-alcoholic. She was so embarrassed, and I sent her home for the day, and I threw the rest of the case away. Thankfully, nobody else had one. We had a good laugh about it afterwards. Story 14. Had an employee admit to minor time theft and sleeping on the job while adamantly denying both allegations. He's a really nice guy, and I felt bad for him, but I was like, dude, seriously? We, myself and his manager, brought him in to issue a documented counseling. The counseling regarding his inability to do his job. But other things came up because he got extremely defensive. So, for the time theft, his manager called him out for being in the workshop asleep one Saturday around 11:30. He's the only maintenance person on the weekend, and his coworker came by to pick up a personal tool he had forgotten and walked in on him asleep in the workshop. The employee denied it, but then later in the conversation stated that he takes his lunch break at 11:30 like he's supposed to, and said he was clocked out on his lunch break when he was caught sleeping in the workshop. But then he went on to say that his lunch gets delivered late, and he takes another break on the clock to eat. So he admitted he was asleep in the workshop and admitted he takes a second paid lunch break that he's not entitled to. He's suspected of spending most of his weekend shifts asleep in the workshop, and his manager has come by and caught him in the act. Story 15. I worked at an assisted living facility, and there was a lot of infighting between the kitchen manager and her staff. I spoke to each person separately, but the only thing I remember is one of the staff said rather emphatically, "I told her she was an illiterate Karen." I truly wasn't ready and had to really work hard to not laugh. Second story from there was not an employee but a candidate. I had to do a background check, and our state regulations at the time said anyone involved in direct patient care could not have been arrested for sexy times work. This candidate said she'd never been arrested. When I did the background, my fax machine was spewing out pages and pages of stuff. She had in fact been arrested just months prior for apparently having sexy times at a bawdy house. Yes, the charges said bawdy house. It was in the parking lot of a hotel. Charges also included having sexy times on a motorcycle, and somehow a goat was also involved on the motorcycle. I worked at that place for 9 months, and those are just a couple of the fun things I dealt with. HR is never boring. Story 16, I'm in the South. In HR, I had a guy who failed pre-employment substances screen, which he failed for Met when I called him to say I was rescinding offer. His wife answered the phone. She called him to the phone, and I could tell she was anxious as I overheard her saying, "Why is she calling? What is going on?" The guy gets on the phone, and I'm sure the wife can overhear what I'm saying, as I can hear everything she are saying to each other. I explained that I was rescinding his offer, and the entire time his wife is having a complete meltdown down in the background, especially when I stated due to failed substances screen. He promptly says, "Well, I know what happened. I've been working for local man and working at his farm. I stepped into some cow manure the other day, and it got on my skin. I'm sure it penetrated and got into my bloodstream and threw off the testing." I said, "Cow manure threw your testing off?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I got it on my ankle through my boots." He said, "I just need to go back and retest." To which I said, that was a no, and ended the call. The wife was hollering and crying when we hung up. Story 17. I was working as an HR for a 750-person company that had a distribution center on site. One day, I received a call from our facilities manager who was on PTO. He instructed me to go check the parking lot as he had heard there was something unusual going on out there. I went to the parking lot and there was a brand new Corvette in the lot. As I got closer to the Corvette, I saw there was a human turd on the ground behind the car. I also saw that there was an older man passed out in the back seat of the car. This man did not work for the company. I had to call the local police as he was trespassing on the property. They showed up, breathalyzed him, and cuffed him. Turns out he was absolutely hammered on a Tuesday morning and had just pulled into a completely random parking lot to have a poo and a nap. Happy to provide a picture featuring both the poo and the dude asleep in his car. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. The office building wasn't even close to a highway. To this day, I am still perplexed as to how he ended up in our parking lot. Story 18. I had been at a new job for about 3 months when the plant manager put in his notice. After he put in his notice, I had 3 members of the leadership team come to me individually to report that he was having an inappropriate relationship with a direct report. Each shared some different details, but one person had solid proof, public records that the plant manager and his direct report had purchased a home together. At first, the plant manager denied it. Then, when I showed him the paperwork, his face went flush, and he admitted that they were roommates. A few minutes later, he confirmed they were in a relationship. These two had been lying to everyone for over a year. Both were married to other people and had kids. We would often do these engagement questions at startup meetings that carried over into our leadership meeting. They continued to answer these questions as if they were still with their married partners. All the while, they had had an affair together, divorced, their partners, moved in together. It was wild. This was my first solo major investigation. My boss and the rest of the HR org worked in NY at the HQ campus. I felt like such a detective. Story 19. At a former job, I was tasked with hiring a temporary clerical worker while my office manager was on maternity leave. One day, the temp left to lunch and left her nudes open on the computer, as well as a Craigslist ad for someone looking for a lunchtime hookup. She had an entire folder on the desktop of her nude photos. I sat her down and talked about how the computers are strictly for business use and we should not be storing any personal files on them. I let her know that I did find some personal files. I did not go into detail. She had stored, and I deleted them, but not to do it again. A couple of days later, one of the guys came to me because they went to use her computer after hours, and she had left nude photos open on the computer. I terminated her the following day, and then she had to sit outside for like an hour waiting for her ride to come get her. I later found out she would frequently go into the shop to use the bathroom and leave the door unlocked or slightly ajar, and multiple people had walked in on her in the bathroom. Story 20. I was sitting in an open area office one morning with about 3 other employees. An employee whom was off for the day came by for a few minutes with his family dog. There is no pet policy. The group doted on the dog, and all was well. I happened to be closest to him and next to our coffee station. As he was saying his goodbyes, I see his dog grab something from the floor and heard crunching. I said, "Hey there, I think your dog might be eating a coffee bean." He went on to tell us all about how much his dog loved eating rocks and then left. 10 minutes later, he is blowing up every staff member's phone, screaming about how I poisoned his dog. I could hear his voice from across the room through a cell phone. It was unhinged. He texted me a few sentences about how I ruined his only day off and that he would not be returning to work for the rest of the week over it. I immediately bowed out of this one and let my HR assistant handle it. I have renamed him Coffee Bean for when I'm talking about him now with my boss. Story 21. One sovereign citizen. The conversation where I tell them they can't work here is hilarious, especially if you get to have it in person. They really want to frustrate you, and when you don't rattle, it makes them so mad. 2. Mediating a dispute between 2 coworkers about which type of feminine products should be available in the ladies' room that the company paid for. 3. High new hire conversation about how he's never smoked weed and couldn't possibly have failed the substances test, complete with bong rips in the background. 4. Using Urban Dictionary as a source in an unemployment claim, meaning of a very nasty Spanish word. The unemployment office called me just to laugh. Story 22. I worked for a branch of a large staffing company. We staffed mostly light industrial positions. I worked closely with the HR director of one of our larger clients. I went to her because I had a complaint from a young female temp I had staffed there for evening shift. The employee claimed she had been flirty with one of the FT employees, but that when she found out he was married, she cut it off, and that he had proceeded to harass her after that. Since the situation involved both our employee and the client's employee, we decided to work on the investigation together. Long story short, during the conversation in her office, the HR director asks the employee if he had ever sent any inappropriate text messages to another employee, full-time or temp. He adamantly said no. She spun her monitor around and had a full screen picture open and said, "Is this your junk?" I wasn't prepared for that, and keeping it together during that moment is the achievement of my life. Story 23. Caught someone napping in the supply room and they told me they weren't napping. My guy, you were lying on the floor snoring. Another time, an employee was swiping through their camera roll to show me something. They swiped past a junk pic. From that moment on, if someone wanted to show me a photo, I asked, they turned their screen away to pull up the photo before showing me. Not me, but my brother, who is a JAG in the National Guard. Someone came up to him requesting parental leave because their wife was having a baby, but the baby wasn't his. The baby's father was another guy in the platoon who came in shortly after requesting parental leave for the same baby birth. Story 24. I interviewed a young man for a sales role and he wore his prom tuxedo to the interview. I interviewed a woman who had a push-up bra on and big fake boobs. Her nipple kept popping out during our interview. Context. It was my first job ever out of college. I worked at a staffing agency. She was interviewing for a call center role. Best story, someone bought a fish on their lunch break and put it in the staff refrigerator to thaw it out because they were going to cook it at home for dinner. I know, weird. However, at the end of the day, when the employee went to get their fish, it was gone. Not thrown away, but gone. Someone had stolen the fish. We didn't have cameras in the break room, so we couldn't figure out who stole the fish. The employee was so mad. We still talk about the fish bandit. Story 25. We had an employee at my old company who was skilled at his job and very liked by everyone, but when he called the office, he was extremely inappropriate. Every time. You can let a lot slide, but when he told my student assistant that he couldn't talk right now, he was the one calling, because he was in the shower and needed to dry himself, implying that it would take a long time because his you-know-what was so long, she was deeply affected by it. I called him back and told him off. I think I was about 25 years old, female, and he was around 45. He often called after that, but he always spoke respectfully to me from then on. Right before I left the company, I found out that he had been elected as the employee representative, and he caused a lot of chaos afterward. Story 26. I have an employee who is currently a team leader, complaining about being tagged late. When he was asked to provide explanation, he kept on saying he had tech issues when he arrived at 5:59 a.m. as site. This has been his habit. Natural Maliat K.A. kept complaining about me not keeping a harmonious relationship with employees at Sabipa from an HR's perspective. Kite, he was never in HR. Definitely wrong use of that phrase. And lastly, he said, why is it taken against me? I've been a supervisor for 3 years from company, etc. Did not respond to him anymore because I don't know how to tell him how stupid his reasons are. Story 27. I once had an employee request an ADA accommodation of not having to use the telephone for work due to a phobia. She made this request by phone instead of an email or other means of communication. Story 28. I once had to referee a spat about Slack emojis. A person complained about somebody else for using the wrong skin tone on their emojis, using a yellow thumbs up. Another case was that I sent an email to managers and started it with, hey guys. And one of the people in the thread complained to my manager about getting emails that start like that. Not because of a gendered term, but apparently for being too relaxed at work. Almost got a warning from my manager for that. Story 29. I worked at an aluminum plant and got sucked into doing safety walks. The factory is 120 years old and massive. The plant closed down for holiday, and I'm out there doing my safety walk and step into this large open yard, smoking spot years prior, and all of the maintenance crews there with a bottle of Jim Beam in the table, and everyone had a shot in front of them with their food. I saw it, they know I saw it, and we all stared at one another, and I just said, "See ya guys later," and walked back the way I came in. Nothing else was said, and we never brought it up again. Story 30. Not really funny, but more so shocking. During an interview for a third shift sanitation role, we asked the guy if he had sanitation experience in his machine operator role, and he responds with, well, when the Mexicans don't do their jobs right, I go in and have to redo some of the sanitation tasks. And my colleague, the department supervisor, got really wide-eyed and said, did you say the Mexicans? Then the guy casually goes on to say yes, and then list several slurs for Mexican people back to us. That interview ended right then and there. Both of us sat in stunned silence after walking the guy to the door. Only funny thing was my colleague's face was hilarious. One of my wildest interview stories to date. Story 31. We had someone pee off of a roof onto someone else. The person peeing claimed they didn't know the other person was down there. However, they moved their stream so it would hit the person. But also it wasn't just that he peed on someone. It was the fact that he publicly peed off of a company roof during work hours when he was up there to repair something. We also had someone showing adult film he thought was tasteful to a coworker. Coworker came to us and was upset and uncomfortable. During the investigation, he admitted to it and didn't think he did anything wrong and maintained that there was nothing wrong with sharing it up till termination. Story 32. Once upon a time, I hired fishermen, and we flew them up to Alaska to longline for cod in the Bering Sea. Before we flew them to Alaska, though, they had to take a mandatory substances test. There was this guy who regularly went fishing for us, who was nicknamed Cheeseburger. We flew him in from Idaho, and at the substances testing facility cheeseburger, gave the testers apple juice. Apple juice. Anyway, after they retested him under supervision, he failed for Met. We sent his ass back to Idaho. Funnily enough, 5 months later, he called us and said he was clean this time. So we substances tested him in Idaho, not making that mistake again, and he was. He went fishing, and we clawed those 2 Idaho-Seattle flights back from his paycheck. Story 33. We had a viewing party to watch an employee on a reality TV show, during which they aggressively made out with someone on screen, and we had trouble looking at them the same again. That said, we do now have some great gifs of their confessional moments to send to each other. Story 34. We had just hosted our annual holiday party and got a call a few days afterward from the venue, who was very upset because apparently one of our employees took a crap in the elevator. I worked for many years for a dog-focused company with a dog-friendly office. A new hire came in for their first week on onboarding with a ferret hidden in his hoodie pocket. Dogs and ferrets really don't mix. Nothing happened, BTW. We just asked him to leave the ferret at home and had to make a policy that dog-friendly doesn't mean all pets are welcome. Story 35. So, I have a few. Someone put on their resume that they were very smart. 2. We record all meetings, and in a recent meeting, a team member was on record using the word duck a grand total of 72 times in 1 hour. Got to be a record. 3. From earlier in my career, someone put on their resume that they interrogate the dogs. Pretty sure they meant integrate. Autocorrect can be the devil. 4. Not so much funny, but I have too many stories about the last group to be at the company parties and events. It almost always ends in a final or a term. Never be a part of the straggler group at the end of the party. It never ends well. Story 36. I worked in onboarding and payroll. I had a new hire submit a direct deposit form. We did not do pre-note. If an employee didn't have an account, they could get a pay card, but we didn't do paper checks. He was let go by his first pay date, and he called for his check. I reminded him to check his bank account, and he told me he didn't have one. I asked him what the account on his direct deposit form was. It was an example of a bank account that he found online. Duh. He then proceeded to show up to the bank in his company shirt, on foot through the drive-thru, and demand his money from an account that he didn't have. Story 37. Tax evasion with remote work. People pretending to be located in states they aren't in, ones with no state income tax. It was funny when an exec never had to travel for in-person functions. They were required to change their health insurance to another plan because they moved out of state and they were upset about it. We were finally like, what's between you and the tax man is your thing, but we cannot knowingly assist you in tax evasion. He just froze like, crap, I'm busted. Story 38. Early in my career, I was an HR assistant for a major car rental company. My HR manager received an anonymous report that one of the station managers was sleeping with one of his reports. After the investigation concluded, we had written reports from employees explaining how he has gaps of time missing from work, credit card statements showing local hotel charges, videos of him and the lady in minivans getting it on. It was wild. This man was married with 2 kids and she was a walking HR issue. My fave encounter with her was when she told me, put mints in my mouth while giving a man a BJ, and it'll drive him wild. I was just trying to pull reports SMH. Story 39. This is not the funniest, but it's one I recently remembered. I once had a direct report who was an HR generalist. I like master's degree and several years HR experience. She was fantastic for about 2 weeks, and then the wheels slowly came off. Anyway, I'll spare the long detailed story, but she tried to take bereavement leave because her cat died. Her cat was 17 years old, was at her parents' house in India. We were in Australia. And she hadn't seen the cat in 4 years in summary. So she was trying to take 2 days of bereavement for a pet that lives in another country and hasn't seen in 4 years. Story 40. Not really funny, more gross, but a second shifter pooped in the middle of the break room during their shift and no one saw it happen. They were where the cameras didn't get them either. We waited to see who would quit or had recently gotten a road up and we never figured it out. People were getting laid off while the VP was spending money on redoing the break room. I guess that was their opinion on the new break room. Story 41. I worked for a local food manufacturer that had incredibly high turnover. Often, we wouldn't get notified of somebody quitting or leaving until they had no hours worked for 2 or 3 checks, and then I would have to inquire what was going on. One employee had not been paid for several paychecks, so I asked his manager what happened, and they said he was hit in a home invasion. I'm thinking how tragic it is that this employee was at home and somebody broke in and shot him. Then the manager says, yeah, that guy was always stupid. He broke into the wrong house that night. Story 42. Back to my beloved manufacturing days over 10 years ago, I received a photo of a styrofoam coffee cup that an employee was using. The employee had written her name on it with an apostrophe to show ownership. X. carols, presumably so nobody would accidentally use it. At some point throughout the day, someone wrote "a man" underneath it, and she reported it to be investigated. Story 43. I'm going to make this vague in spots because it involved a workplace injury. So we had a worker at a site where there are cameras everywhere. However, they are not super noticeable because the site is a historic site that is frequently visited by the public. This worker and several coworker friends tried to stage a slip and fall incident. Literally on camera, you can see the worker lie down, then toss a few things around her to make it look like she dropped them when she fell and they placed a table on its side over top of her. Cameras don't lie. Story 44. I had employees who were in an all-out war of what news channel played in the break room. Someone would change it to Fox and then it would go back to CNN and so on and so forth. Finally, one person got smart and figured out how to block Fox on the TV. Anyway, we had to remove the remote from public use and decided on a neutral channel. It was hell for a few weeks, but also super funny. This went down during the first Trump era, maybe 2018 if I can recall correctly. Story 45 has situation where a substances test came back positive for just about every illegal substance known to man on a new hire's talk screen. When she called in to discuss the test results, she denied the results. It's her right to dispute, of course. So I handed her a specimen cup and told her to bring it back filled to the 1/2 line. To say she was upset was an understatement. She began screaming that her sister had taken the test for her, as she swore she was clean and the employee hadn't expected to take a test. Story 46. Staff mocking our CEO in real time. At every annual year-end all-staff meeting is legit hilarious because it's so true. She always cries. She always says really inappropriate things. There's always cleanup I have to after she does her act. The memes shared between HR and legal, who know the full story of just how poorly she runs the business more than anyone, are classic. Our tradition is to send the Michael Jackson Thriller meme of him eating popcorn before the start of these things, as we all wait warily for the fallout. Story 47. Someone came up to me and said, "I need to show you something." And I just looked at him feeling entirely skeptical of what I was being led to see. Some asshat had put tampons on his machine and a note about his bad attitude. Then there was the guy who kept tall boys in the toilet tank for after-hour sanding and assembly work. Someone once got caught putting a pie into an industrial oven used for powder coating. Story 48. A healthcare organization I once worked for, we had received via USPS an anonymous note with a pic of 2 employees engaging in super fun activities on the premises. The pic showed the male under the female skirt. He had to arrive early to open the clinic. She would arrive early, before her scheduled shift, to engage, which is a huge liability. Anyway, she had just returned from maternity leave. Turns out this was her 6th child, but it was his kid. She had 5 other kids at home with a husband. They were both fired. Story 49. This happened to my boss when I was a wee ill admin, and he was her male coworker requests a female coworker to add him on Instagram. She does, then allegedly receives a junk pic via DM. She calls in to complain. She is going to come show him the picture. My boss had to stay at work late to wait for someone to arrive and show him another employee's junk on their phone. In the end, he posted it to his story, did not send it as a DM. Therefore, no action was taken. Story 50. Worked at a skilled nursing facility. A new hire LVN nurse showed up clearly intoxicated. We insisted she accompany us for a real-time substances test, which we had a policy to support. Drove her to the clinic. We're sitting in the waiting room. The LVN stepped outside for a cigarette. After some time, she hadn't come back, so went out to look for her. Found her in a neighboring establishment. The clinic was in a strip mall, begging the person behind the counter to provide her a sample of their urine. She failed the substances test, obviously. Story 51. I reckon I might win this. Call center for a major company. We had a whistleblowing report of a group of staff were running a casual sex WhatsApp group using the disabled toilet. Interviewed the alleged parties, but no one admitted anything, wouldn't allow us to see their WhatsApp. The toilet obviously didn't have cameras, but also the door was in a blind spot, so we couldn't prove multiple people going in. We had to get inventive. They were all dismissed for unauthorized breaks. Story 52. When I was with a former employer, I handled workers' comp claims. One of the employee's girlfriends kept saying she'd break up with him since his junk was small. He got the genius idea to roll over the shattered windshield of a car in our possession. Worked for an auto auction salvage company. Hid his junk in the process, assuming workers' comp would cover surgery. They didn't. When he found out, he threw something through a glass door and shattered it and was terminated. One of many crazy stories I have. Story 53. A difficult employee got arrested in the office. Turned out he'd been arrested a few days previously and had given our office as his home address. So when he broke the terms of his bail, the police rolled up to the office and took him out in handcuffs through reception in front of clients. Super straight-laced industry as well. It was very entertaining. Story 54. Someone was annoyed a colleague was too close to them in an elevator. First off, it's an elevator, and I saw the footage. They were not that close to them. And without saying a word, physically picked them up and set them down a foot away from them. Didn't think that was weird at all to do. Story 55. I fired a guy at work. He texted my work phone a few days later and said he found a new job, and it was nice knowing me. He went on to say that he figured I probably already had a significant other, but I'm really cute, and if I happen to be single, he'd like to take me to insert name of local dive, where he'd buy me wings with celery sticks and ranch. Wow, wings and celery sticks and ranch? A truly generous offer. I didn't reply. Story 56. Company with no HR department sent an excellent project manager to an expensive training course to learn HR management. The week after she came back, we had to fire her for making out with another employee in the kitchen. Story 57. I had to once investigate a manager sniffing the chair or a female employee after she got up. As an HR manager, I completely had no shame and no problems asking direct questions. That was probably in the top of my more fun investigations. He was a pig and was fired. Or the guy picking up an escort in our decaled work van, called in by a member of the public, with GPS in the van. Good times. Story 58. I was assisting an employee in setting up an account with the company's app, used to access their schedule, among other benefits. The employee opened the Safari app on their personal phone to begin creating an account. He had adult film pulled up in a tab and was about halfway through the video. Apparently, he never clicked out of it after his last session. From then on, I look or step away whenever an employee is doing something on their phone. Story 59. An employee who had attendance issues. We already had discussions with him. He said he was in a major accident and sent a photo of his totaled Tesla. Reverse search of the image showed this is as a years-old news article. This was a manager making $300K plus. Sorry, pal. Story 60. Worked at a garden center that sold grow lights. Employee stole 2 grow lights and set them up in the attic of the store, where he cultivated some healthy marijuana plants. He got caught when the manager noticed light coming from the attic at night. Story 61. I went into work at 10 p.m. for the overnight shift's mandatory harassment training PowerPoint. Our company was in a rough neighborhood, so I asked one of the taller employees to walk me to my car at 11:30 when we finished up. He not only asked me out, but made several explicit comments on the way. I asked if he had any idea what I was doing in the building so late. He was fired. Story 62. Dude, I can't forget this guy. He's applying for a backbend developer. I told him to just hold on for a bit. I went outside to get a glass of water, and after doing so, I went to my seat and put down the glass of water I got. This meth took that glass of water and chugged it himself. I don't even know how to react. I was just appalled by what he did. Story 63. One of my peers had a guy that was running a sex toy shop out of the purchasing department. An employee called HR department to let them know that they picked up their sex toy at the purchasing department. The employee was mortified, but also felt like it needed to be reported. So, the HR manager got online and ordered some sex toys and asked if he could pick them up. Could you imagine? Story 64. Had to sanction someone for writing boobies on a calculator, then holding it up to the CCTV camera for the guy at the bottom of the ride to see. Unfortunately, the woman's family were also waiting at the bottom. The fun bit was watching the disciplining manager tie himself in knots, trying to avoid saying boobies. Story 65. I don't work in HR per se, but I work for a company, and we were consulting with a client and their HR team. It got really awkward when someone didn't realize their camera was on and started walking around butt naked. The real killer was they would walk over and occasionally shake their mouse and walk away. Never saw them on a call again after that. Story 66. Once released an ops director for gross misconduct. He thought he had sent his wife, who also worked at the company, a picture of his junk. Unfortunately, he hadn't updated his phone book. Wife had moved roles and returned the handset, handed her work phone back, and only had her personal one. Story 67. Funniest day ever. At work for me was the time me and the safety manager ate some of the caramels I'd made while trying to pull off a site-wide Halloween party during business hours that day. We had so much fun and laughed so damn hard we hurt the next day. Not a great funny story, but a great funny memory I'll never forget. Story 68. Had an employee that was terminated. They waited outside for the manager to bring out their personal effects. Manager walks out to deliver these items, and the employee is sitting on the hood of their car smoking. Story 69. When I was doing a Zoom interview with someone who was a few weeks out from graduating and still living in their dorm. While in the interview, I see someone crawling on the ground. It was their girlfriend, and I guess she thought she was outside of view and was trying to leave the dorm room undetected. Story 70. The vending company forgot to lock the soda machine door after they restocked it one day. Some enterprising employees took it upon themselves to replace the sodas with beer. Story 71. Had someone show up for an interview, generic question about being a good fit for the organization, and he said, "I don't know, what job is this for? I forgot." We then asked about his experience with drinking water quality, and he said he has a fish tank and does a pretty good job keeping that clean. Story 72. Having a baby boomer call me on my mobile and shout, "I did not draw junk," after I had provided an allegations letter alleging they had drawn a junk in a workshop on company values, no less. I still can't believe I even had to draft that allegation. I still smile when I think of that call, though. Story 73. Once had a serial pooper that would poop on the bathroom floor almost daily. I left before they figured out who it was, but they had an idea. One of the managers even made a TV slide on how to use the toilet that goes by every few minutes in the break room. Story 74. A member who was asked to leave the company citing poor performance and role redundancy insisted we retain him, as he has just patched things up with his girlfriend, who worked in his team, and they were on good terms after a long time. He was also ready to work at a lower salary. Story 75. Having conversations about deodorant and why it's necessary. Several conversations with the same employee, complaints spanning months. Also talking to my intern about why eating smelly roast beef from the local grocery store at his desk is not okay. It was stinking up the whole cubicle space, leading to 3 complaints from accounting. Story 76. Once one of my employees crap on the lawn at a very large manufacturing facility everyone knows the name of. We were a contractor to the facility. We found out it was one of our employees because an executive from another country stepped in it and immediately demanded the footage. Story 77. I had to pull 4 interns into an office and ask them to pull up their pants, and that their thongs being visible while they're sitting at their desks was not appropriate. Story 78. Had a guy that was let go show up 2 days later fighting for his job back. He came with his girlfriend. They had the Cookie Monster plus raw Rick and Morty sweatpants combo on. He didn't get his job back. Story 79. I was teaching a training session on reasonable suspicion and had one of my employees show up completely, 100% high. We're talking red eyes, eating a cookie, and absolutely reeking of marijuana. It was a bold choice, to say the least. What are your HR horror stories? Story 1. Also, Gov worker here, and can absolutely attest to this. HR is not your friend. No matter how much they tell you, your union is. Always go to your union first. My coworker was continuously sent inappropriate texts from her boss, one in particular quite graphic. They literally just tried to arrange her to work opposing shifts in the same workplace. This is with irrefutable proof that it happened. This was like 5 years ago, and he's still there. Story 2. Human resources are employed by the company for the company. They mitigate risk, but not for the employee. I don't work for the GovET, but 2 very close people to me do. Both have had horrendous bullying situations in the last 12 months, and both have just shuffled around the organization until they found somewhere less awful. Story 3. I worked for Gov as a contractor, and yeah, there were some dynamics there that was unlike any other place I've worked. I don't want to say too much, and I don't know if it's because I was from the private sector and worked in industries where there are a lot of regulations, so I maybe wasn't used to it, and it's normal for other industries. Like, I've been in places where you can recommend people you've worked with for jobs and stuff, but I noticed that everyone in a permanent role in my team was either dating or married to someone else in the department. Everyone else was a contractor, and there were some interactions between senior male managers and female staff that I've not seen before, and at times it was a little uncomfortable. Maybe it was a case of talent, but how it felt was that if you weren't involved with someone in Gov, you weren't going to be picked for a permanent role or promotion if it became available. If a senior role was recruiting, he would give it to his wife or something. And maybe that makes sense because husbands and wives share skills, or they met at work in the same team or something, so the skill set is there. But I would have thought you'd at least have to acknowledge that if you're giving a job to your wife, maybe there's a potential conflict of interest here. Story 4. There's a lot of negative experiences being shared, which I understand. I want to share an alternative one. I work in an HR team for a mid-large organization. The people I work with genuinely want the best for our employees and aren't corporate HR protect the business, not the people robots. Our internal net promoter score is 94% from an open and anonymous survey on a scale of 100% to 100%. I hope that indicates the kind of relationship that we have with our staff. I wish I could share some of the above and beyond things we do for people every single week. Yes, we take care of business too. HR is often serious, but we aren't here to be snakes or blindly protect management, etc. Not all HR teams are like that. I know that many are, but not all. Our business lets us be human. We're comfortable enough to laugh and have banter with our employees when it's appropriate. We're caring and compassionate when times are hard, professional and competent when things are serious. We're just a bunch of chills as duck people who are passionate about what we do. The only times we are snakes is when we play coup every lunch break, which gets heated as hell and is very fun. Story 5. I work for an old government agency for the last 2.5 years. HR will never be your friend, and if they are inexperienced, they can stuff up your kips and never consider the actual software issues, which if you're on contract can be very stressful. I am neurodivergent and have other disabilities, and at no time have they considered a request for a flexible arrangement at work. I had to quit law because no one would process my time off to study. We are micromanaged to the point of psychological injury. My health has really suffered. In fact, I had a gay team leader who bullied me, along with another employee who lied about me. I am treated like an idiot and shamed for asking relevant questions because most lack the integrity and honesty. People pass the buck constantly. You seek help and you are stomped on. I hate it there, and I'm sick of the lying, lazy, work-dodging kiss butts. I have never experienced so much disability discrimination in any place as I have in this government agency. Work culture is a joke, so I am leaving because if I don't, it will kill me. Story 6. All the lovely policies that government departments are supposed to follow are great. The problem is the people who administer them and fail to follow them properly. Holding them to account doesn't work unless you take action in the external court system, which is a long, drawn-out process. In my experience, the other issue is the incompetence of HR people generally. They either don't know or don't take the right action. There are some really great ones, but the majority are not up to scratch. One of my closest friends is also a senior HR employee, and even she laments the skills and abilities of those that also work in HR environments. Her stories are astounding. What I've also learned from her is the constant breaches of even the most basic principles of privacy that occurs between government departments and openly flouting rules and the law as no one holds them to account. I am also now aware of the contractors, who are their friends or colleagues who support their own agendas and both benefit from the relationship. Story 7. I was working in a team that developed e-learning courses as a programmer, which was under HR. When Campbell Newman came in, half the department and team got sacked. Sadly, I was in the half that got kept on. After the mass sackings, the new head of HR did one-on-one interviews with everyone in the team to explain their new roles in the new structure. In my interview, I was told that I was going to be a HR generalist going forward. I told them that I was a programmer, and while I was pretty good at JavaScript, PHP, Photoshop, and all the things you need to know to make e-learning courses, I didn't know the first thing about being an HR officer. It was then I realized how indiscriminate the firings must have been. I was an 805, so they must have just culled half the A05s without really taking into consideration what they do. I left the public sector not long afterwards as part of the natural attrition they anticipated. Story 8. I filed a complaint against a senior employee who told everyone I was an escort, who kept making suggestions. When I ignored him, he told everyone I was at fault for seducing him and then not sleeping with him. BTW, he was old and married. I had plenty of witnesses, yet HR told me I should not create drama. And apparently he was so convincing they thought I was really an escort. Like, what the heck? They told me to take leave. I didn't take leave, but I didn't go to work. Then through the union got 3 months paid sick leave approved and found another job. Story 9. Work for Old Gov. A guy who was employed for 10 years was constantly harassing female employees. He even used to stalk them. The women involved would report what was happening and nothing would come of it. Eventually, the union found out. They interviewed everyone affected. They then took all the evidence they had and went to management. Absolutely slammed them for covering things up for so long. Guy was told to quit or the police would be involved. I wish they didn't give him that option. They should have got the police involved so he couldn't get into a position where he could do it again. In another division of where I work, it is apparently worse. Multiple guys harassing women, but they are all management and cover each other. Story 10. Cackles and work cover crap show. Bullied by superiors for 2+ years. HR found my treatment reasonable and in line with expectations of duty when they investigated. Work cover assessors did not agree. Lawyers did not agree. The instigators still have a job. It then took HR 3 months to work with work cover and provide the relevant documentation needed. HR, in the meantime, continued to state I was AWOL and threatened my role would be terminated. Despite submitting all paperwork to HR, line managers, crap, I even sent it to payroll. My experience is not unique to the site. The turnover of staff and long absences are all accredited to the same behavior of the same people. Complaint after complaint lodged, it was just that I was the only one to have irrefutable evidence. Story 11. I have a close family member who works in old government HR. She was bullied out of one team by a colleague. Luckily, she's now in a good, close-knit team with a very empathetic boss. The team takes bullying complaints extremely seriously, and a few people have ended up in close monitoring or training. Now and then someone gets fired. At the same time, they bend over backwards to accommodate changes and leave requests, etc. Most HR teams aren't like that. And still, She has no real idea of what it's like being on the front line, and the gaps in her knowledge about being the target of management bullcrap are scary. Her team really does try, though, which is different from most. HR in most places is generally a crap show. Story 12. I understand that there are some hard-working old government employees. However, nearly all of the feedback I receive from friends and associates that move from private to government is that the system is broken. In addition to being broken, it's administered by incompetent, lazy, and vindictive grubs determined to quash to anyone who demonstrates the slightest bit of competence or initiative whilst growing their headcounts to increase their fiefdoms. I have numerous examples. However, the specifics would identify the aggrieved parties. Unfortunately, the consensus is that, regardless of the government, the establishment would whiten any attempt to fix the problems. The only solution for those in these toilets is to leave. Story 13. More with Queensland Health, but a friend of mine was telling me about this assault case that they had to review. Basically, an older male nurse was hitting on any younger female nurses that walked through the door and wouldn't take no for an answer, making many feel uncomfortable. Eventually it got escalated, and they had to suspend the male nurse. However, he was suspended with his full pay plus his COVID pay rise. After about 1.5 years, they came to a solution, which was to place the accused into a different hospital. From what I understood, they were essentially just keeping him on his full pay packet and were just waiting until an equivalent position opened up at a different hospital as their resolution.